On March 14th, Justin Trudeau stepped down as Prime Minister of Canada, a job he had held for almost a decade. Former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney, his successor as Liberal leader, has called an election set for April 28th. With this changing of the guard, now may be the time to look back at the Trudeau years and see how they set us up for the era to come. So is it too early to define Justin Trudeau's legacy? How will Canadians remember his years in power? These are the questions I hope my next guest can help answer. Here to talk about The Prince, the turbulent reign of Justin Trudeau, is author Stephen Maher. So yours is one of two books about Trudeau published in the last year. In On the Ropes, Paul Wells looked at the Prime Minister, the now former Prime Minister, as a boxer who keeps on returning to the ring. But you look at him as a prince, hence the title of the book. Over and over again, we see, as you put it, he is a prince, and the rules don't apply to princes. Is that how we'll remember him?
Well, I think that's partly how we'll remember him. When I was first asked to do a book, I started thinking for a couple days, and while I was still considering the project, and it was when I settled on that frame as a way of thinking about him that I decided that I should do the book. I first started thinking of him as a prince years ago. The first time I met him was in a pub in Ottawa, Darcy McGee's. When he walked in, he was not even an MP then, and I knew he was, and I was a reporter, so I thought, oh, I should go talk to that guy. And we had he impressed me as being open and friendly and interesting to talk to. And I was sort of going on about something, and I started talking about different prime ministers and how they were similar and different. And I said, and Martin was like this and Trudeau was like that. And I realized I'm talking about his father. So I stopped myself and said, oh, that's your dad I'm talking about. And he kind of got an unusual look in his eyes and said, oh, I never forget I'm a Trudeau. And at that moment, I thought, oh, okay, this is a princely character. He has a legacy linked to power. And then when I was researching the book, I found examples of his mother, his wife, and his brother all calling him a prince. So I reread Machiavelli and started thinking about what it means to be a prince. And in Trudeau's case, I think it's a good frame, a good way to think about him, in that he has good qualities that are princely, courage and charisma and confidence, and has other qualities that, he can seem capricious and full of himself and entitled. So, you look at the whole picture together, and I think it's an accurate way of thinking about him.
It's easy to forget the surge of optimism that characterized the early days of his reign. Take us back to the days of sunny ways. Did Canadians back then vote in a new optimistic administration, or did they vote out what was then a tired conservative government?
I think a bit of both. It's funny in retrospect. While I was researching that period, I realized he didn't actually campaign on sunny ways. We kind of remember that he did, but he didn't use that phrase until the night of his election victory. So in our minds, we kind of project backwards and imagine him campaigning on that. But it was at the moment of victory when he sort of reminded us of Wilfrid Laurier's use of that expression. Strangely enough, when he left office, the national mood was similar to when he took office. There's a division in the country largely around the political economy of resource development. The people in the Alberta and Saskatchewan in particular, but other places as well, feel that it's foolish to restrain our exploitation of natural resources, and people in Toronto and Montreal and Vancouver and other places as well think that we have to take action to deal with climate change. And that division has gotten it really emerged during the Harper years, and it's become much more emotional and, in a way, damaging to the country, to national unity in the years since. People blame that on Trudeau. You could also blame that on Harper, or you could look at it all and say that that's a central fact of Canadian life, is that we are divided on that and have been for the last 2 decades. So, in a sense, the country was divided when he took office. For about a year during this honeymoon period, people kind of rallied around him, but eventually the division that's underneath politics reasserted itself.
One of the more memorable lines the Conservatives used against Justin Trudeau during that 2015 campaign was, "He's just not ready." And later on in the book, you say how tempting it is to agree with them. Were the Conservatives right about him in the final balance?
Well, um, in some ways, he exceeded expectations. Um, but on foreign policy, our foreign relations, we don't seem to be well prepared for this moment of peril in our relationship with the United States. Um, I think you can argue that he ought to have seen the invasion of Ukraine as a wake-up call, and rethought particularly our military readiness, um, some economic questions. He basically settled on a kind of progressive formula and never moved from that. And I think that, given our growing weakness, that you could make the argument that he would have been much better off becoming more centrist at some point, to try to blunt the anger of the outsiders and better prepare us for the kind of crisis that we're in now. So in a way, I don't feel that he left the country in good shape. Um, and I'm not sure that that's a personal failing, but our relationship with India is terrible. Our relationship with China is terrible. The Trudeau government was, I think, very slow to recognize that we had to take national security and foreign interference more seriously. So, I think that there's the critics of Trudeau who make those kind of criticisms. It's not like you can just dismiss them out of hand, right? Like the country has a lot of problems, and he leaves it with a lot of problems.
You quote a former advisor to Trudeau's who has three tests for prime minister, and we covered off one of them. Are we better off on the world stage? The other two are: is the economy better? And the third is national unity. How would you say he did on those other two tests of a successful prime minister?
Well, I took note when Mark Carney, during the English leaders debate, uh, criticized the last 5 years of economic management. Um, Productivity per capita has been declining. GDP per capita has been lagging similar countries. That's partly as a result of um, out of control immigration that most Canadians who generally support immigration think was a mistake. Um, so I think that on economics, there was a period where the sort of first half, I think there was an argument that they were doing a lot of things that were helping people at a grassroots level, which is part of the economy. Uh, but at some point, they failed to they or he failed to see that we had economic problems we had to wrestle with. Um, yeah, and national unity. Certainly, it's not great. I don't know if we're quite in. There's no referendum on the horizon or anything, but I'm concerned about the state of opinion in Alberta, for example.
When do you think the bloom came off the rose? You point out that Trudeau enjoyed something of a long honeymoon, but then that honeymoon, as all do, came to an end. When do you think that was?
Well, I think that it began with his 1 year in, almost exactly a year in. He made an ill-advised, a sort of hilariously ill-advised holiday trip to the Bahamas. Um, he made an ill-advised trip to India. You had the SNC-Lavalin scandal. Each of these things, um, with each one of these things, he basically lost some people, and you can see it in the polling that over time, people who had originally liked him or been ready to give him a chance would say, oh, well, I guess he doesn't know what he's doing, and turn away. Now, some of those people came back during his, what I thought was very impressive response to COVID. But after that, really the good times ended with the decision to call the 2021 election, which looked opportunistic, where they never really seemed to have a good reason for it. And he got into trouble, partly because Aaron O'Toole seemed like a substantial and plausible prime minister. And so the Liberals ended up having to jam O'Toole on vaccine mandates because he could not take the position he wanted to because the Western Canadian Libertarians in his caucus wouldn't let him. So Trudeau had to really increase tension around that. And really, for the rest of his time in office, he could not escape from having done that. For about 10% of Canadians, the sort of anti-vax libertarian crowd, they saw him as someone who had set out to destroy them, to do him in. And when you combine them with the people who are resolutely opposed to his climate initiatives, you start having a significant chunk of the population that despises the prime minister and feels that he's betrayed them. If you combine that also with people who felt that he didn't adequately defend the symbols and history of the country, that you get a sort of period that begins in 2021 where most people in Canada have basically had it with him or think he should go or are ready to move on.
Another recurring theme I want to touch on the book, and you go into some depth on this, is how difficult it is to get close to Trudeau. You see it from Jody Wilson-Raybould, Bill Morneau, Mark Carney, and of course the relationship that triggered the moment we're in now, in a sense, is what happened with Chrystia Freeland. Was it a case of him just leaving those relationships with his ministers, with his senior staff to manage, that he didn't really want to, roll up his sleeves with those people and develop those relationships?
So I think so. I mean, ultimately you can't outsource cabinet management to your staff to the extent that he tried to. And you have all these people, Morneau, Garneau, I think Dion did not describe this. He went on to work for the government, but it felt like a similar scenario where people who you would think would be working closely with him felt remote from him. He is, in a funny way, an introvert. So he thrives on being the center of attention, being in public, mixing with big crowds. He gets drained by one-on-one time. And I think, in a way, maybe sees himself as a kind of spokesperson for the government, somebody whose job it is to be the face of a big team. And so if he thinks of himself that way, he's not really thinking of himself as a team member, if you know what I mean. And the result is obvious. is he was not able to keep everyone who he ought to have been able to keep on his side, right? Like that's, and in the end, it's what drove him out. However, the one thing I would say about the Chrystia Freeland resignation, it appears to have been mishandled by Trudeau and his people. They needed absolutely to keep her on side, and they lost track of her and didn't understand how she felt, or so that's a failure of cabinet management. But her public resignation and so on was made possible. The context where that was a sensible move for her was 2 years where he's 20 points behind Pierre Poilievre in the polls, right? His position was fundamentally weak because for 2 years he was so far behind and didn't have a reservoir of support to draw on.
Now, since the book was published, we've seen the re-election of Donald Trump, the sustained rhetoric about Canada becoming the 51st state, and strangely, this moment gave the Liberals an unexpected bounce in the polls. Do you think Justin Trudeau and how he handled this, do you think he'll be defined by these final moments in office?
No, history will has a way of um, taking things and processing them over time. I interviewed Brian Mulroney for the book, and he's a good example of that. When he left office, Canadians despised him and couldn't wait for him to leave. And then he had a significant scandal, about a public inquiry into his personal business dealings that he had to apologize, and it all looked pretty bad years later. But still, at the time when he passed away last year, people remembered him fondly and talked about the significant accomplishments of his government. So there's a sort of interesting history-making process that takes place that is somewhat mysterious how that really comes about. It's partly, the work of academic historians. It's partly the way our memories change over time, and maybe our sort of normal human desire to see the past in a way that is agreeable to us. And Trudeau, in particular, for that first year, he was Canadians could take a great deal of pride in his presence globally, right? He was handsome and progressive and a symbol of Canada, and he remains like world famous, right? So these people sometimes observe that Canadians are insecure about how the world sees us, and all around the world now, people kind of know something about Canada because of Justin Trudeau. So, I don't think that those kind of positive feelings are going to disappear when we look back.
What do you think his legacies are for the office of Prime Minister itself, or his legacies overall, policy-wise or otherwise?
But I don't think the office changed very much while he was there. The media environment was changing, but it was just kind of an acceleration of what had been begun in the Harper years. So you have the prime ministers becoming more disciplined and centralized in reaction to a chaotic and largely hostile media environment. And by media environment, I'm talking about social media. And, they were on the leading edge for a while of successfully managing social media, and then they kind of lost the plot. I think policy-wise, he promised to reintroduce cabinet government and make government more open. I don't think that he really can get a lot of credit for doing either of those things. And I'm not sure the current prime minister or the next one will be able to either. In terms of policy, he presided over a significant expansion in the social welfare state. Uh, the Canada Child Benefit in particular has been hugely helpful to young parents. But there's, childcare, pharmacare, dental, retirement, many, many things. There's a lot more supports for Canadians who need help now. That is to some extent a sort of partisan thing. Some people think that's good. Other people think it would have been better for him to be cutting taxes, as Harper did. So that's part of his legacy, but how you see it depends on how you see the world. He legalized marijuana. He handled Trump 1.0 successfully. He handled COVID successfully. Those are things that, in a nonpartisan way, you can look at and say, okay, well, those were accomplishments. So it's going to take time, I think, for people to sort of sort out how they feel about all of that.
Now there's a new Liberal leader, as we know, Mark Carney, who's campaigning to remain prime minister on a more permanent basis. How does Trudeau set him up for that?
Well, the most significant thing that Trudeau has done is not contradict him. And it's an interesting comparison between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. Kamala Harris needed to distance herself from Joe Biden's economic policies, and he would not let her. It's sort of come out since that he said no daylight to her, right? Meaning, you mustn't criticize me. She might have won if she had been able to say, well, look, I've been glad to be part of the Biden team, but I think we've made mistakes, and here's how we're going to change. Trudeau, in his supreme confidence, right? He's an extremely confident person. He's not bothered that Carney is out there saying, well, the Trudeau government, we need to change. I think that's actually comes from his princely confidence. It doesn't hurt Trudeau's feelings. Carney is able to distance himself and is going to run like kind of seemingly like something of a progressive conservative, which it seems to me is wise. When Trump was elected, I wrote a column for the Toronto Star saying, basically, it's time for a progressive conservative government. The country's under national threat. We should get rid of the carbon tax and do all kinds of things, basically to start acting from consensus positions, because national unity and sovereignty is most important. So we should put water in our wine and do things that everyone can basically accept. Trudeau couldn't do that. Carney appears to be doing that.
Have we seen the last of Justin Trudeau?
I don't know. I suspect not. His father returned from time to time to the national stage and campaigned against the Meech Lake Accord, for example. He's got two kids who have stepped into the spotlight. His son with an R&B tune, his daughter with a speech at the Liberal convention. It's probably another 20 or 30 years before we have the next Trudeau prime minister. But the family, it's kind of like the Kennedys in the United States. They're woven into our national life, and I suspect we'll see more of Justin and other Trudeaus in the years ahead. I suspect Trudeau will likely return to the public speaking circuit. He is famous around the world. There'll likely be an appetite to hear from him, and he can make money doing that. And it'll suit him if he manages to say things that attract attention to himself, both because he likes attention and because it's useful to keep his name in the headlines.
What do you hope he will get out of the book?
Well, I hope it helps people understand how they're governed. Um, and to see the political parties and as systems, and to see that it's a big, complicated country, difficult to govern, and I try to treat its constituent elements with respect, and I think it's useful to realize that we have political parties and politicians who are representing very different views of the country. That's sort of my view after having spent a couple decades covering federal politics. So I hope that comes across, and I hope that it helps people see how Trudeau, whether you like him or not, he's a real person, and the people around him are real people, and they should be understood on that basis, not as a sort of symbol of a hero or a villain. They were they were all a bunch of people in that party and the other parties in government, muddling through and doing their best and stubbing their toes and falling down stairs and occasionally succeeding at something. And politics is hard, and running a country is hard, and that's sort of what I hope people get from it.
All right. The name of the book is The Prince, The Turbulent Reign of Justin Trudeau. It's published by Simon & Schuster. My thanks to author Stephen Maher.
Thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it.